So you just read your first bit of information about real estate. And what the heck did you just read? So I thought I would do a summary. Here's the written content, but I thought I would go through it. So you got kind of a second opportunity to have your eyes on it. And I'll do this for our other chapters as well. We're starting though with land and property ownership. And property ownership, just to kind of get the lay of the land, is what types of real estate are considered property and what types of property are considered real estate is what we're building a foundation on here with. First of all, let's go over different types of property. That's over here. And let's start with residential. Residential homes can be anything in a suburb, an urban, or a rural area. It includes single-family standalone homes, condominiums, co-ops, or timeshares. They're often also townhomes or an apartment style feature, or maybe even an apartment building. Commercial is office space, shopping centers, theaters, hotels, anywhere you go to do business would be commercial. And commercial can be light or heavy. And residential can be light or heavy as well. It all depends on the density, meaning how much fits into a smaller versus a larger parcel of land or piece of land. Mixed use. This is what I kind of refer to jokingly as the mullet of real estate. Hear me out. This is where like a mullet, is business in the front and party in the back. Mixed use is usually party on top, business on the bottom, which means we've got a row of businesses on the base and above it are apartment buildings. A really good example in West Des Moines, Iowa, if you've been there, is West Glen. We've got an area of businesses all on the bottom, restaurants, attorneys' offices, framing stores, post office, and then above, I believe it's 2 or 3 stories of apartment buildings on top. Industrial, this is where our warehouses are going to go. So this is going to be large manufacturing plants, such as Tone Spices. That's right off the intersection of kind of I-80 and I-35 in Ankeny, if you've been there. Agriculture, this is Iowa. I don't know what to say. If you don't know what agricultural land is, gosh help you is what I was going to say, but I'm teasing. Agriculture land, though, is where we have our farms and where we raise our crops. Special purpose is going to be privately owned property, but it's been designated for things such as schools, cemeteries, churches, other places of worship, or maybe even parks. Now, here's where real estate really holds into play and where we need to start having you be licensed in order to represent someone on the buy, sell, or lease and rent is with land. And land is the basis of real estate. And it's defined as the Earth's surface extending down to the core and up into the sky into infinity. Which means that land really, when you sell it, typically has 3 characteristics. The first one that you learned about or that you read about was surface rights. That's down here on this first page. It's going to be anything on the surface, trees, bodies of water, grass, bushes. The next one we have is subsurface rights. That's over here. That's going to be anything below the Earth's surface. And then the third element is air rights. That's down here at the bottom. That's going to be anything from the sky up into infinity. Okay. Let's go back though, and let's start with these surface rights, because one key element that I mentioned was water sources. And water sources are broken down into 2 specific categories. One is riparian rights, one is littoral rights. Now, here's how I choose to remember this. Littoral rights is lakes or smaller. Riparian rights, sorry, I've already said that incorrectly. Riparian rights is rivers or smaller. Littoral rights is lakes or larger. I'll say it one more time in my defense. Riparian rights are rivers or smaller. Littoral rights are lakes or larger. So riparian rights, what the real difference for you is going to be whether it is a navigatable river or not. And here's going to be the difference. The mighty Mississippi is not owned by one person, right? It's kind of a state or government owned river. So if you've got river front property along the Mississippi, you will own it to the banks. So you're not going to be able to control what barges go in or out, right? Because your property is going to stop at the banks at the edge of the river. If you and I were neighbors though, and we had a small stream or river that went through our property, most likely we're going to own it to the center of the water source. And yet we're allowed to float around on the surface of the water, right? We don't just draw a string down the center of it. So while the actual property line might be in the middle, we're still able to navigate it. We're just not able to put a dock on each other's property, obviously without permission. Littoral rights is where I think maybe you've got the best candidacy for a test question. This is lakes or larger. And the key thing to know with littoral rights is that beachfront property. If you've ever been to the beach and been walking along the water, looking at all these beautiful houses, were you walking through someone's front yard? Huh? Oh no, you were not. Most likely when you are walking on the sand, you are walking within the high tide or the high water mark. And that is typically where beachfront property owners stop their property limits, is at that high tide or high water mark. Typically in the United States, that comes in during the night. I've heard in Hawaii, it comes in early morning. And I think if you think back to the beach, you can always kind of see that line of water. That's typically the high water mark. That would be the difference between public property and private property. One other great test question for you is the doctrine of prior appropriation. That's here on this second page. And what this means is in some states where water sources are scarce, Arizona, for example, if you're going to irrigate your crops, you must have permission to do it. So in order for you to irrigate your crops, you must have government permission. It's regulated by some sort of state or local municipality. But again, you've got to have permission to irrigate your crops with the doctrine of prior appropriation. Now, we've got 3 words here about what water does with its activity and with its flow of stream. And really accretion and erosion are the 2 that you probably are most familiar with. And while this may not be hugely exam worthy, I do know in Iowa it's a thing. Farmers work very hard to keep their topsoil on their land. Otherwise, water, wind, other Mother Nature activities can cause that topsoil to drift somewhere else. And when it drifts somewhere else, it's called erosion. But where it ends up is called accretion. So for some of you may know, some of our state parks here in Iowa have been closing in the last 2 years. And not only has it made the size of the body of water smaller, it's also really contaminated. If you are into the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, they put out a lot of reports about just kind of the health and ickiness of some of the water in some of our state parks. And it's not been good. Well, that's because upstream, folks have had soil eroding, and when it gets to the lake, it's accretion. And we're getting all of their icky stuff, maybe pesticides, etc., flowing down into our state parks and then making the water not as friendly. So what a lot of them do is they put ponds upstream so that flow of water stops, and then our state parks, those lakes aren't filled with accretion and start to shrink in size. Subsurface. This again is the things below the Earth's surface. And when I think of it, I think of striking oil. Oh my gosh, what if you struck oil? Who does that belong to? And the United States of America is a pretty cool thing because we've got a democracy, despite what you think of your government now, whenever you're watching this video, gosh only knows what's going on. We've got a pretty cool thing here going with democracy. Some countries, if you struck oil, they'd come and take your property from you. But you get to keep those subsurface rights. And it always makes me think of the Beverly Hillbillies. And I know some of you have never heard of this show before. Some of you have. It was an old black and white TV show. It was about these hillbillies that had nothing. And they struck oil. And they moved to Beverly Hills in a mansion. And it's all about the crazy things that happen when they basically just don't fit in. But I always think, I hope they either kept that farm where they struck oil, or if they sold it, they kept their subsurface rights so they could still pump for oil. Okay. And you can sell these three things separate. Typically, they're always sold together, but you could sell your surface and air rights and keep the subsurface rights again to keep, pumping for oil. Last but not least is air rights. And again, this is the sky up into infinity, and it is very common to sell air rights for transportation or skywalks or something like that in bigger cities. For those of you who might be familiar with Ottumwa, Iowa, this is an interesting one about air rights that I've learned. Is a little restaurant called Canteen in the Alley. And if you've not been there, I recommend it. It's very interesting. Canteen in the Alley is a little restaurant that seats 16 people, and they serve loose meat sandwiches is their main course. And they also serve, I think, chips and homemade pie, coffee, pop and water. That's it. Very limited menu, but people go crazy for these loose meat sandwiches. They're not made rights because that's registered trademark, but they're a loose meat sandwich. What happened was, to my understanding, the city of Ottumwa came in with a grant to revitalize their downtown shopping and commercial area and wanted to put up a parking ramp. And they asked the Canteen in the Alley if they would move. And the Canteen said no. The name of the restaurant is Canteen in the Alley. So they've got to stay in an alley. They've got a lot of drive-through pickup that just pull through that alley and pop out and get bags of sandwiches. And they do really, really big to-go orders I've seen. So what they did as a compromise is they left the building there and they sold their air rights to the city. And now that parking ramp goes up and over the building, Kind of an interesting win-win solution, I hope, for them. Here's some characteristics, though, of land that we should probably review. The first one is immobility. Well, things on the surface can change because of weather or fire. The actual parcel cannot be moved. It's virtually indestructible. Again, wind, fire, other acts of Mother Nature can change those human-made objects, but the location and the land essentially is going to remain the same. Just think, when that tornado hit Kansas, Dorothy flew off in the house, but the land on the farm remained the same while she was in Oz. It remained the same location. Uniqueness means every parcel of land is different. They may look identical on the surface, but they really are like snowflakes. Really, I don't think any two are alike on the surface, probably either, because of terrain and hills and trees and those details. But in the subsurface as well, soil can be very, very different. If you've traveled much in Iowa, you'll notice that soil in southeast Iowa versus southern Iowa versus northwest Iowa, very, very, very different. Very, very different texture of soil. So each parcel of land is unique. Economic characteristics of land. First of all, scarcity. There's only so much land available on this great earth to actually build. And if you might notice what's happening with new construction in your area, where are new homes built? And for example, in the Des Moines area, there's very few lots available in Des Moines proper, maybe even West Des Moines proper, they're very limited. Now we're starting to see suburbs like Adel almost be filled. And on the north, we're starting to blend into Ames practically, where Ankeny used to be kind of our top suburb. As things get built, that's because that scarcity doesn't allow for only a certain number of homes, right? It's not infinite. Number two, improvements. What type of human-made permanently attached structures are put on that property? Or what unsightly elements have been removed, such as dead trees or overgrown shrubbery? How permanent is the improvement? How firmly are they attached? Is it meant to be there temporary or permanent for 100 years or more? And number four is the one you're probably most familiar with. This is area preference. This is all known as location, location, location. And there just are some neighborhoods that are just more desirable than others. And because of that, they maintain their value at a higher rate, or sometimes when we've seen the market cool off a little bit, they've remained much in demand just because usually of their location. So I hope this review helps you. And we'll see you in the next video.